Good morning, friends. It's Tennille at Rotwood Acres. I'm going to show you the real quick, down and dirty, basic sourdough recipe that I use most of the time. We used up, I have like this much of a loaf left for after breakfast, and I know that we're going to want buns to go with our chili tonight. It's 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, so I got to get some dough started. The whole family's outside, and I want to go join them. So let's get to it. I bake in double batches. Work smart, not hard. So in my bowl, I'll put everything in the show notes too. I have got 4 cups of all-purpose flour and about 2 cups of whole wheat flour. In any sourdough recipe, you can generally replace about 1/3 of the flour with whole wheat. I don't remember the technicality, but I listened to a podcast by the lady who wrote this book, Sourdough by Science, by Karen Lynn Newman. She's a PhD. Jill Winger interviewed her on the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast, and it was really interesting. So that was a little side note. And I don't remember the action, but basically something about the whole wheat flour can be really beneficial for your sourdough starter. I like the taste. I have some in the pantry. So that was my rabbit trail. 4 cups white flour, 2 cups whole wheat, and then I have 2 teaspoons of salt in here. 1.25 cups of water per batch, and then I mix my sourdough starter in. You can see that it's really good and active and bubbly because it's floating on the top. But I am going to quickly whisk it in just so that it mixes through the batter a bit nicer. If you measure your sourdough starter into your water, your cleanup is easier because you don't have that sticky flour solution sticking to your measuring cups. So that's why I do it this way. I put 1 recipe of water, 2/3 cup of active starter, so 1/3 of a cup per recipe. And then I'll go back and get my second recipe's worth of water, so it's another 1.25 cups. And then I just use like a rigid spatula or like a mixing spoon. It looks like water and flour, right? Cool. And you're just going to mix it until it all comes together. I love this recipe because you don't have to get in there with your hands. You don't have to do any kneading. It's a very, very basic, good kind of utility dough. It gets the job done. And I calculated based on flour prices at Costco. I bought a 10 kg bag of flour this week at Costco. So that's 22 pounds. A pound of whole wheat flour. I weighed it up, a recipe's worth. So 3 cups if I did this whole recipe with all-purpose like white flour. The 3 cups weighed out to 1 pound. So my 10 kg bag that I paid $10 for, I can get about 22 loaves of bread out of, and they're going to cost me about 46 cents in flour per recipe. Now I went on the Flip app and looked up bread prices because I wanted to know. You're very, very cheap, that Old Mill brand, like I don't even know how they call it bread. Even Wonder Bread was $2 a loaf. And then if you wanted to get into like, is it Country Harvest? I don't know, something that actually has some texture to it. Those loaves are around like $3.50 as your flyer sale prices. So you really cannot get cheaper than, what did I say, 46 cents a loaf and a couple minutes of your time. There we go. I've mixed it together. It looks like dough. I'm going to cover it. I use a plate because I don't like single-use things. It fits nicely on my bowl. I'm going to shove it to the side and go join my family. Even with some chit-chat and some rabbit trails, my timer says this has been a 4.5-minute video. So that's how quick it is to make the sourdough. I will come back this afternoon, probably around 4, that's 6 hours from now. And shape it. We'll get it in the oven and we'll have fresh bread with our chili at supper time tonight. So now regarding your sourdough starter, if you think you're going to want to use it again in the next couple days, you can go ahead and feed it to get your quantity back and just leave it out at room temperature, uncovered, if you have fed it. If you want to see how long your bread lasts, or you're not quite ready to tackle another baking session this week, that's fine. Put a lid on it and toss it in the fridge. And that just helps to slow the fermenting action. If you accidentally leave it out or whatever, you're not going to kill it. It's not going to go moldy or anything. If you leave it out at room temperature and it hasn't been fed, in a couple of days you may notice it gets kind of a gray liquid on the top and it will smell sour. That's called the hooch, and that's just a sign that it's hungry. It's up to you if you want to either pour that liquid off, or you can stir it back in if you like a more like sour tasting sourdough. Either option is fine. If you leave it open and you haven't fed it, it's not active and bubbling, sometimes it dries out and you get a bit of a skin on it. I find that happens really fast in the fridge, that it dries out and gets that kind of skin on it. As long as it's not like obviously growing mold, which I've only ever had happen once. I left my sourdough starter out in the summertime and the flies got into it, and I did have to throw it away because it did not look healthy. But I just kind of peel that dry skin off and I chuck it in the compost pail, and the chickens or the pigs or whatever eat it. In the summertime, one tip to keep in mind, what I like to do if I have fed my sourdough starter, I need to leave the lid off, but I'm going to leave it on the counter. We live in a farmhouse and we get flies really bad. I just put a coffee filter over top so that there's still air exchange, but it just helps to keep pests out. Now, I did say that I was going to come back and bake this in about 6 hours. So I'm going to leave it at room temperature or somewhere warm. Sometimes I'll put it over by the fireplace if I really want it warm. Another thing I sometimes do is I'll mix up my bread dough. You can leave it out longer. Like I said, it's a really flexible, versatile recipe. Sometimes I'll leave it out overnight. Like if I've baked it often I start my bread around 9:30 or 10 at night after the kids are in bed. I'll leave it on the counter overnight, but if I have to get up and go to work in the morning and I don't have time to bake it, but I know that we need bread, I will make the bread, I will leave it for its rest phase on the counter, and then I'll pop it in the fridge. Just to slow it so that it doesn't over ferment. When I get a loaf that I've done that, over fermented, I will show you what it looks like. But you can pop it in the fridge to slow it. They call it to retard the fermentation. You want it to rise and look nice and lofty, like a bread dough was. If it gets over fermented, it starts to deflate again and gets, like the structure is more jiggly. You want that like nice inflated water balloon so that if you poke it, it does kind of spring back. I'll show you examples of that later. But for now, you've got your loaf made. You can decide if you're either going to feed your starter again and leave it out, or if you're just going to put it away and see how this goes. That's all I have to say. We'll talk again later.